From the mountains to the prairies, with creatures great and small, nature's struggle marches on with some unlikely alliances. One wouldn't think that here at Joint Base Lewis-McChord you would find the ideal location for the study, restoration, preservation, and research of rare and endangered species. But think again.
Many people ask, why is a conservation group working with the Department of Defense? And the answer is really two-sided. First, there's more endangered species on Department of Defense lands than on any other federal agency's lands. So the rarest resources are on these military installations. And that's why CNLM is working with Department of Defense. But the flip side is, why does Department of Defense want to work with the Center for Natural Lands Management? Well, that's because the best training lands are these open grasslands and oak woodlands and natural vegetation, which is more resilient and better to train on. And we found these shared goals, shared values.
I'm Dr. Jeff Foster. I'm the ecologist at Joint Base Lewis-McChord, and I work to study, preserve, and restore ecosystems on the Joint Base, which also serve as training lands for soldiers. Through the ACUP program, the Department of Defense partners with the Center for Natural Lands Management and the state agencies, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and so forth, to acquire prairie lands in the region, restore them, and reintroduce the listed species onto them.
My area of emphasis is ornithology, and I also lead up the science program. So the base is a little over 90,000 acres. My principal duty here on base is to find mechanisms to restore and conserve species and land. There are two primary mechanisms that we use to conserve species and land on JBLM. We collaborate with two great partners. One is the Center for Natural Lands Management, and the other is the Sustainability in Prisons Project.
So today we're here at 13th Division Prairie. This used to be an active runway that was decommissioned back in 1990. The more we can do on base to recover the populations and the more we can do off base, it takes some of the burden off JBLM so that we can maintain that military training aspect that is important to JBLM. We work with them on a wide variety of tasks, one of which is advancing avian conservation. And so streak-torn larks is a species that we focus on. We also focus on western bluebirds and Oregon vesper sparrows.
We try to enhance those areas for species and have at times cleared areas in order to make more open prairie habitat for some of the endangered or just rare species.
So the scientific name for the streak-torn lark is Eremophila alpestris strigata, which translated from the Greek is solitary desert alpine loving one. I love that. It's so fitting. So here's an adult male standing on a rock. He was banded last year as a nestling at the site, and in order to mitigate impacts to the nest or prevent these potential predators from using myself as a cue to finding the nest, I'll do some fake nest checks.
So we're here on Joint Base Lewis-McChord, Training Area 15, where we're actively trying to restore habitat for the Taylor's checker spot butterfly. Here we've got one butterfly type species, the Lupinus lepidus, which is also used by the lark as a nest host. So they like this structure, sort of this clumpy, somewhat high vegetation, and they tend to build their nests on the northeast side. Since it also has this structure, the Taylor's checker spot will use it as sort of as refuge from weather, and also as a nectar plant. And one of the reasons why we're propagating this species here on this prairie is as early as the late 1990s, there were roughly 8,000 butterflies in this area. And you hear stories from the old timers about having to walk through clouds of these species and them landing on your hat. And then within a matter of years, they kind of just blinked out. And so it's providing us the impetus to really get this site prepared for reintroduction as early as 2017.
This whole area at Glacial Heritage, for example, was about chest high in an invasive shrub called Scots broom. And just a real, that's all that was here, kind of a big monoculture. And so we are taking actions here to transform this site back into an area where fire is a regular presence and we can support the original suite of native species.
We work with the military to use a scientific approach to do our restoration. And we have this luxury on Joint Base Lewis McChord where we can burn these large landscapes along a row of cybert stakes, which indicates to the military that any off-road vehicle traffic cannot occur on this side of the stakes. And then here behind you, we have an area that burned last year. And then here to your left, there's an area that didn't burn for 4 years. And you can see how much the broom has grown since that time. For the butterfly restoration, they're very expensive seeds and very expensive plugs that we use to build the prairie. And so when we plant those seeds and we put those plugs in the ground, we do so in a way where we can track them over time to see if we're planting them in the right place and actually getting the results that we want so that we can maximize the efficiency of putting those seeds down. And moreover, we're also building these restoration sites in a way where we can look at butterfly responses to the habitat that we are building to ensure that we're building something that the butterflies actually want and can prosper with over time.
Another example of CNLM's unlikely alliances for prairie restoration is in the use of prescribed fire.
Good morning, my name is Bob Wilkin. I'm a burn boss for CNLM, and we're going to talk about our prescribed fire program. I've been in fire since 1975. I've been involved in conservation and ecology since then. Smoke jumper back in the 70s and 80s, got involved with prescribed fire, but always a strong love for conservation, so came back to conservation about 10 years ago. I travel the country helping develop crews and fire programs and training, all related back to the Department of Defense, DoD, and their ACUB projects and restoration for prairies. Terry Jewell is here joining us today as the representative from DNR.
Here at Department of Natural Resources, we're working with CNLM, dealing with smoke management and making the public aware of what's going on.
One of the big things is the transition from full suppression, as we've done in the past, to encourage proper fire management. And the big challenge for us is Smokey Bear with a shovel in one hand and a drip torch in the other.
We're standing on a fence line here between private land that belongs to the Nature Conservancy. The Center for Natural Lands Management is managing it. And right across the fence is Department of Defense military lands. And it illustrates the interesting juxtaposition of partners that are working together in these areas. So we have lands that the military is particularly interested in maintaining their open character to facilitate training of troops, but at the same time, many of us are interested in the ecological benefits. These are a few of the plants that we're trying to manage as we're carrying out the restoration and the burning on the site. The kinnikinick with the red berries here is a native plant that's the host for the hoary elfin butterfly, and it only occurs on this plant and nowhere else. In the middle of this prairie here, we've got more of the golden paintbrush, the federally listed rare species that we're trying to recover here. We also have host plants for the Taylor's check spot butterfly that have been planted here, the English plantain. Some of the native wildflowers, some of which come up on their own, like the harvest brodea, the farewell to spring, or Clarkia, named for William Clark of the Lewis and Clark expedition, that an annual species that we've sown out here.
So as you can see, we're getting a lot of drift, but not any lift. So as the clouds start to break, that's what we want, is our smoke to go up, go across the road, and it can settle out later. So one of the things that we're trying to do with our restoration project is catch the seasonality effects. So one of the things this time of year with the Scots broom in its full growing mode, green, a lot of moisture to it and everything, when we get fire in here now, it basically gives it a really bad sunburn and it'll help root kill it. Late in August and September, when this is cured out and is in dormant season, we actually just burn the stubble off. But what carries fire in here is those fine dead thatch fuels, the 1 hour fuels that we talk about. So even though we had fog, moisture and dew this morning, just in this past hour, these fuels that were wet dried out enough for us to start doing our ignition.
We've been looking at the mounds of the Mazama pocket gopher here, and in all my years coming out here, it's been a pretty rare occasion for me to actually see one of these animals. I'm continually humbled and awed by the enormous diversity of plants and animals and insects, pollinators, birds, and so forth. Probably we're talking maybe 400 to 600 species that utilize these prairies one way or another.
Another example of CNLM's unlikely alliances for prairie restoration is in the use of grazing.
We're here at the Violet Prairie Scatter Creek Preserve. This is a site that was purchased by the Center for Natural Lands Management in 2013. Our work here is really aimed at improving the native diversity at this site and restoring some of the habitat conditions, the ecological both structure and functioning that supports a suite of rare species. Here we want to evaluate how grazing might also be used as a restoration tool on our conservation properties. And so the use of cattle with different grazing regimes might allow us to expand the toolbox a little bit here and utilize them to reduce some of the vegetation and open up bare ground to allow for native seeds to get established.
My name is Mark. I'm a restoration technician here at the Center for Natural Lands Management. I do field work. I don't go in an office. My office is a pickup truck. And my job is to implement the science of restoration on larger acreage, multiple acres, using equipment like the tractors, brush hogs, boom sprayers. Today I'll be boom spraying with this machine to reduce the weed competition from our native seeds when we plant them in the fall. The container is used for seed storage on our seed farm. When we collect the seeds and clean them, we store them in there. Those seeds need a particular environment, cool and low humidity. And so that piece of equipment is equipped with a refrigerator and a dehumidifier.
I'm Peter Dunwoody. I'm a botanist and a restoration ecologist working with the Center for Natural Lands Management. Diversity of native species that once were prolific across these areas has been severely reduced by decades or even centuries of agricultural activities and growth of weedy species like Scotch broom. We've also been working with local ranchers and farmers to use grazing livestock, where we can achieve some of the similar effects that may be beneficial to rare species like Taylor's check spot butterflies and Mazama pocket gophers.
We see a great opportunity to work with some of the local ranchers to provide land for their cattle to come onto the site, to kind of act as a win-win. The cattle are reducing a lot of the non-native vegetation, and then we are providing that land for the rancher to actually graze their cattle during a time of year when it's often difficult for them to find enough forage.
Another example of CNLM's unlikely alliances for prairie restoration is in the use of seed farming.
We are here at the Violet Prairie Native Seed Farm. What we do here is produce seed for all of the restoration that happens in the South Puget Sound. We have about 70 different species of native plants growing out here to produce seed that get spread on the prairie after fire and restoration occurs. We have laid out here a number of the different species that we grow. We do grow over 100 different species of plants. Much of what we do here is invent new tools, repurpose old pieces of equipment, and generally try to develop methods for producing these native seeds, which are really quite different than agricultural seeds. The nursery program was developed in order to remove the limitation that was set by not having enough plants and seeds. In the past 15 years or so, the nursery program has grown from a backyard volunteer effort to 15 acres of seed fields, 3 or 4 greenhouse facilities, and an enormous seed processing facility. All of the plants that we plant here on the prairie are produced by our partner, the Sustainability in Prisons Project.
I'm Carl Elliott, the Conservation Nursery Coordinator for the Sustainability in Prisons Project. Has been invited by the Center for Natural Lands Management to grow all the plugs for both seed production and Taylor's checker spot butterfly recovery sites. There's over 10 crew members at each facility that produce these plugs.
Native seed farming requires an incredible amount of labor, and we work with quite a few different groups here to supply all the work that's necessary, including veterans through the Veterans Conservation Corps, prisoners through the Department of Corrections and the Sustainability in Prisons Project, as well as professionals in the farming and agriculture industry, interns, and local students.
Another important and rewarding alliance is our continuing relationship with our military veterans.
So the Veterans Conservation Corps was founded in 2005 in the Washington State Department of Veterans Affairs through state law. It was founded in the memory of a gentleman named John Beal. John Beal was a combat veteran from the Vietnam War that after he returned home, he had several heart attacks in his early 30s. From a hard life, basically working through a lot of the post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and he went back home to his house, which sat on the Ham Creek, which is one of the tributaries to the Duwamish River, and saw a lot of appliances and car parts that reminded him of the carnage that he saw when he was in Vietnam. So he started cleaning up and picking up Ham Creek, and he attributed his longer life, or his ability to give back and get in touch with the community, to conservation, his ability to give back.
We purchased this Bayshore Preserve in 2014. It's 74 acres of mixed habitat, and we contracted out to CNLM to do this prairie work. We have Johns Creek that flows through the property that when the golf course was here was very channelized, and since then we have dug a bunch of side channels to provide habitat for salmon and other native fish species to spawn.
Today's Volunteer Day at the Bayshore Preserve. We have a pretty strong group of volunteers who meet twice a week to help with restoration activities.
Hey, I'm Dylan Jones, currently serving a service term with the AmeriCorps through the Center for Natural Lands Management. I do prairie restoration in the South Sound area.
I am Jason Kais. I served in the U.S. Air Force from 2004, Airman First Class, and then in 2006 I went overseas to Afghanistan. I got out, I did a complete career change. Veterans Conservation Corps has provided me the opportunity to actually come out here and be involved in the restoration and maintaining our existing prairies and restoring the prairies back to their former glory as they were, up until about the 1850s.
I volunteer for the CNLM every Tuesday and the second Saturday of every month, and this is an oak that they want to not spray when they come back and spray the prairie again to kill the unwanted grasses left from the golf course.
My name is Matthew West. I work with the Veterans Conservation Corps. What we do is trying to help veterans find jobs in the environmental realm as a means of ecotherapy as well as professional and personal development.
My name is Peter Gallant. I'm a VCC intern. I was kind of a recluse for about 3 years, and this has helped me kind of rejoin society. I had some issues with PTSD from a few different things. With other veterans also, we're kind of clingy to each other. We do better in groups. It's a fantastic way to spend a day, and I highly recommend it to anybody who has the opportunity to do this.
Center for Natural Lands Management is a science-driven organization. It takes quite a bit of staff and equipment to help save some of the rarest species in the U.S. and restore the habitats here in South Puget Sound.
The Center for Natural Lands Management is grateful to the Department of Defense and all the people working in the various agencies here in the great state of Washington. Please join us in our efforts to preserve the heritage of our natural resources.